Piles of junk and garbage, makeshift tents made of plastic sheets, cardboard, and whatever else people could get their hands on. Dozens of tents. This isn't a dump. This is where people actually live. They sit right on the ground, digging through piles of waste. This woman is a proud owner of an armchair she got somewhere. Here's a large group on the sidewalk, and almost all of them are lying right on the ground, high as a kite. There are those who are moving around like sleepwalkers. A young girl with a completely absent look in her eyes and dancing as if she's not here but in some other world. A half-naked guy with the same meaningless stare stumbling among the cars, clearly having no idea where he is or where he's going. Another one is trying to go somewhere, dragging his butt along the pavement. Just a couple of feet away, there's a homeless guy on the ground with a festering leg, drinking something. And this is a stolen goods market. Things are laid out right on the sidewalk. On the other side of the road, there's a different kind of market. The girls are selling their bodies. They are so young, minors even. Their services cost from $10 to $20 an hour, but at night you can find someone even for $4. And this girl, for example, is such a terrible sight. She's so young, but you can tell she's been using for a long time. Her stare is completely vacant. It feels like there are no sane people here. Everyone is high. This dude is high too, walking right into traffic, greedily eating some food out of a black plastic bag. These two are feverishly going through the garbage. This guy is just strolling down the street, wrapped in dirty sheets. And this one suddenly takes his shoe off, pokes at it for a while, and then starts chewing on it. This is Bronx, the most dangerous district of one of the major Colombian cities, Medellin, and also a home of the 20th century's most infamous drug lord, Pablo Escobar. This is where he grew up and conceived an empire that ended up controlling up to 80% of the world's cocaine trade. His operation was pulling in at least $10 million every single day. Can you imagine $10 million just dropping into your bank account daily? Every single day. And tales about his cruelty are mind-blowing.
He took the pistol out of the hand, just tore it out of him and put it between his eyes and went click, 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 click.
He tortured, punished, and killed in the most horrific ways imaginable.
In 1989, he blew up an airplane with 100 innocent people on board. And in 1993, his team detonated cars carrying over 200 pounds of dynamite in a crowded street. 20 people died on the spot, including 4 children, and another 70 were injured.
Airliner blown up the Aviaca airline and killed all those people, women, children, old people. I thought, you're a monster.
Silver or lead, that's what he used to say. It was Pablo Escobar's motto and his way of doing business. It means take money or die. And at some point, this kid from a poor family became one of the wealthiest people on the planet, wielding power akin to a country's presidents.
He was incredibly wealthy. He had around $3 billion or more. And he owned mansions in many places.
At the same time, he was and still remains to many people in Colombia a kind of Robin Hood, a friend of the poor.
Pablo began doing social work in various places, like in soccer fields, for example, distributing food baskets and organizing sporting events.
Despite his influence, Escobar and his cartel were unable to seize the ultimate power in the country. Eventually, all of his partners in crime were either killed off one by one or sent to jail.
And then I went to prison for a marijuana charge. I got 35 years for possession of marijuana and tax evasions.
So who was Pablo Escobar really? Why did people worship him? And how did he get to become the world's top drug trafficker, seizing control and corrupting many levels of the government of an entire country, and a massive one at that? What changed in Colombia after his death? This is the story of Pablo Escobar, of his rise and his fall. See those cars by the roadside? Trucks, SUVs, taxicabs? Those aren't just parked there. They are all waiting in line to buy illegal substances. A so-called bomb was just delivered here. That's what the locals call a shipment of drugs, and people are waiting for it to be divided into small portions. A dose of cocaine costs around $30. We are driving through Bronx, a district of Medellin that no tourists have ever set their foot in. They are selling illegal substances here literally every step of the way. Dealers are standing in the street and sitting in their tents. To find a pusher, all you have to do is step outside. But where is the police, you might ask? They are certainly looking, but they don't see anything because there is an alert system operating here. If you look carefully, you'll see what looks like an ordinary guy at every intersection of roads on every block here, and he will have a whistle like this in his hands. These guys are called falcons. They monitor the traffic, and as soon as they spot a police car, they whistle twice. Once the whistle is blown, all sails around stop immediately. You might think it might be hard to hear a whistle with all the noise around, but those for whom it's intended never fail to pick it up. When the police leave, the falcon blows his whistle once, signaling that the dealing can carry on. Drug trafficking here is highly organized and structured business. Each block has its boss who controls both the dealers and the lookouts. The block bosses report to a higher boss, who is responsible for the entire district and everything that happens in it. This person would usually be an appointee of one of the cartels. He controls everything that happens on his territory and must solve all problems. Say, if a shipment gets seized by the police, he's the one to handle it. And judging by everything we've seen, this business here is running extremely successfully. If you can't find something in Medellin, it doesn't exist in Colombia. That's the saying the locals have here. The way I see it, it mostly refers to illegal things. I'm struggling to find a proper word to describe this neighborhood. To me, it looks like nothing short of a zombie land. Everyone's stoned, covered in dirty rags, and there's an unbelievable stench all over. Look at the houses. People live in houses that look like they were put together from bricks scavenged at a dump. It's like they just spat on them and stuck them together. If you look closely, it honestly looks like an oversized dog kennel. Sure, there are some better quality houses here, but there's one thing they all have in common. Every single one has bars on the windows. There's literally no other way to live here. In an area just like this one, Escobar spent his childhood. He was born in 1949 into a poor family of a farmer and a school teacher. Even then in Medellin, every second person was in a gang, including kids. Local boys joined gangs as early as 10, usually as lookouts or spies. By the age of 12, Escobar was already dealing marijuana and stealing anything he could.
Pablo Escobar began his criminal career in petty activities. For example, he would steal gravestones from cemeteries, sand them down, and resell them.
This is Betrayal, author of several books about the Medellin Cartel, the Colombian Mafia, and Pablo Escobar in particular. He has studied their history inside and out. Escobar's personality is simply shrouded in mysteries and legends. His hidden stashes of cash and jewelry keep popping up here and there to this day. I mean, for real. For example, not so long ago, a farmer found a cache of $18 million in one of Escobar's former houses. From selling stolen gravestones all the way to smuggling cocaine by the ton. The man was serious about it.
He is the rock star of drug trafficking. Pablo Escobar, he was of the leader of a vast and giant industry that went from transporting just a few kilos to entire tons of cocaine that flooded the streets of U.S. cities.
And selling cocaine by the ton brought him unimaginable riches. The Medellin Cartel, headed by Escobar, was making up to $30 billion annually, my friends. These figures sound completely unreal, but it becomes easy to believe once you hear what the people who personally worked for Escobar have to say.
I was really rich at one time. Making $2.5 million a day, you couldn't help but be rich.
This is Roger Reeves. When he was young, he was a professional pilot who ran his own small airline of light aircraft. That means, even before working for Escobar, he was already involved in smuggling marijuana. And it was Roger who helped Escobar expand his business to such enormous scales by letting him use his airplanes. He transported huge shipments of cocaine from Colombia to the United States by air. And just think about it. The man was paid $2.5 million for a single trip.
Now that kind of money changes people. I don't care who you are. It changed me from a poor farm boy to a millionaire guy.
Roger had already been making some money smuggling marijuana on his planes, but everything changed dramatically when he met Escobar. At that moment, the budding cartel needed a professional pilot to take care of flying cocaine into the U.S.
He didn't speak any English. He dressed in a khaki pants, starched and ironed, nice plaid shirt. And so he said, yes, we have all the work you can do, and we'd be happy to have you aboard. So I went and got my plane and I went to work. So I worked, I guess, about a year with them.
Could Roger have said no back then? He says that he could, that no one was going to force him to fly the planes for them. But being offered that kind of money felt like saying no wasn't even an option.
And we pay $5,000 a kilo. I said, how much will you put in each time? And he said, 500 kilos. And I thought, that's $2.5 million now. That's right quick. I said, I believe we can work something out.
And so Roger became the man who made an enormous contribution to the spread of illegal drugs in the US and to the enrichment of Pablo Escobar.
I was their hero. It was nothing like in a movie. You was just welcome.
At the same time, Roger insists that it was still nothing more than a job for him.
I wasn't stressed at all. When I was coming back in the United States, I knew I was in danger. So, I was ready to do something. When I landed, I was not comfortable, that's sure. I was looking around me and ready to run, but I wasn't stressed.
Around that time, Escobar was working out a reliable system for transporting his drugs across the border into the US. He was setting up his delivery channels and required them to be fail-proof. He needed guarantees that his precious cargo would always make it to the destination. No stops, no seizures. Escobar ensured this by bribing officials and the police.
The politicians and the police was certainly part of it. They call it bribery. If a person in Bolivia had 100 kilos of cocaine and he wanted to get to his brother in New York, he was assured 100% that it would get there, or at least to Miami. That was all they insured it for. And if they lost it anywhere along the way, it would be replaced in Colombia. Well, that was just like going to Las Vegas with a chance of not ever losing. And then there I was, right there the day it started. And with the big airplanes that I had, long range, I just fell into it. It was just opened the door for me. So I did like 90 trips, me and Barry, and 90 trips.
By the way, Roger assures that he has never lost a single ounce of goods on his flights. Everything that was loaded into his plane had reached the dealers on the other side safely, and it wasn't exactly an easy job to do. The thing is that Roger flew light aircraft, and 500 kilos of cargo was either the absolute maximum payload, or very close to it for such aircraft. And on top of that, you had to know how to stay off of the US radars.
And I'll just tell you how I did it. I would come out of Colombia slow because I was so loaded, I'm afraid the wings were going to tear off sometimes. But as the fuel burned off, I would get higher and higher, sometimes up 30,000 feet. And when I got about 300 miles off the coast of Louisiana, out in the Gulf of America, we call it now, I would drop down to the 50 feet above the waves and come in slow, and come in late in the afternoon, just at dark. And at that time, there would be maybe 50 helicopters changing crews off of the oil wells. And I would slow down, and they'd just be blinking their little red lights, and I'd slow down and come right in with them. So there was no way that they could pick me up on radar at that time and single me out from the helicopters. So that was how I did it, and it just worked like a clock.
And yet, there were different situations, and this system didn't always run like clockwork. Sometimes, Roger had to literally hide behind other aircraft.
And when I would fly down, I didn't know where I was going often. And I would come down to 10,000 feet, 300 miles an hour, and I'd start circling. And then I'd see another airplane be below me at 5,000 feet. And I'd get right behind him, and he'd wiggle his wings, and I'd wiggle mine. And I'd follow him sometime for an hour or more. And then he'd land at a jungle strip. I'd land behind him.
All of this sounds like a script for a gangster blockbuster, but it was in fact the real life that Roger lived. He says that even though Escobar and his gang were dangerous people, he had never had any problems getting paid. And since the sums were enormous, his payouts were handled like a special operation every time.
I don't know what it was, every Tuesday or something, or whenever I was supposed to, I don't remember what days, I would go to a Cuban sandwich shop. And Alito would be in line, and I would come in line, and I would be behind them, and I would talk to them without them even turning around. I say it's to the green Ford at the Holiday Inn in space number 22. Okay, and they say, all right, Holiday Inn tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Well, I'd be there. Somebody dropped me off, and there would be a car there. And it usually had some dice, big ones hanging over the windshield, and the key would be in the exhaust pipe or over one of the tires. And I'd just get in that car and drive away, and it would be loaded with money.
Getting paid by check or wire transfer was, first of all, more complicated back then, and secondly, far more dangerous. It would have been too easy to trace the origin of the money, so the mob always preferred cash. Escobar had so much cash that he had to have entire basements built for storing it. Think about it, he used to spend $2,500 per month on rubber bands alone for the stacks of bills. At the same time, people say that around 10% of all that cash in those basements simply went to waste. Some was eaten by rats, some disintegrated because of dampness. But how did Escobar rise to such heights, so to speak? At the beginning of his career, he was a small-time crook, selling fake lottery tickets on streets. With friends, he robbed people coming out of banks with cash, then graduated to racketeering and murder, and began taking part in gang wars.
One of their workers, no? These groups became embroiled and violent wars, and there Pablo proved to be a ruthless and effective killer, no? Which earned him a notorious reputation in Medellin as a dangerous bandit.
Then he and his associates took on stealing cars and stripping and selling them for parts, until they figured another way to do business by bribing the police to re-register the stolen vehicles and selling them whole. This is a good example of how his mind worked. He then found a way to make money not only by stealing the cars, but also by not stealing them. He began selling his own insurance. Pay Escobar and no one touches your ride. This way, Pablo wasn't just killing 2 birds with 1 stone, he was killing 3. People paid for protection, and by paying, they immediately showed that they had money and instantly became the next potential target for his gang. And if anyone refused to pay, that person would be kidnapped and a huge ransom was demanded from the family. And if they didn't pay, the victim was simply killed. In 1971, the 20-year-old Escobar started to acquire his Robin Hood fame, and it became with a high-profile murder.
Situation and notorious event was the kidnapping of Diego Echavarria Misas, the richest man in Medellin in this time. Pablo and others kidnapped him, and he was found dead 3 weeks later.
Diego was kidnapped, and a ransom was demanded. Whether the kidnappers got paid or not is unclear now, but they ended up killing Echevarria and dumping his body at a landfill. And here's what happened. People of Medellin began celebrating the death of this oligarch. His wealth had simply irritated too many of the poor folk, and Escobar had played the public sentiment perfectly. He didn't hide his involvement in the murder, and people started to respect him for it and see him as a protector of the poor. What the rest of the world considers unacceptable was, at that moment in Colombia, welcomed by many. Colombia is considered one of the most dangerous countries in the world. This was officially recognized by the World Economic Forum in 2017. For one thing, high crime rates, ongoing armed conflicts, a constant terrorist threat. People of Colombia have lived like this for decades. The authorities have been waging war on the drug cartels all the time. And yet meanwhile, the area dedicated to growing coca trees has only been increasing here. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, a total of 1,738 tons of cocaine were produced in Colombia in 2022. That's almost 400 tons more than the year before. And you know, this data comes from the official sources. In reality, the volumes must be a lot larger. Naturally, almost all of it is produced for export. And there's so much of it that the revenues from drug trafficking in the country exceed the revenues from oil sales. Essentially, this is Colombia's main export commodity, and its main consumer market is still the United States of America. Miami is considered the main transportation hub on the way of drugs from Colombia to end customers in the US. The supply system was established in the 20th century, largely through the efforts of Escobar's cartel. After catching the wave of popularity following the murder of Diego Echevarria, Escobar turned his eye to drug trafficking, and his idea was to supply cocaine to the US directly. Up until then, the smugglers' route to the US had been controlled by the United States' mobs, and their main transportation hub on the way there was on Cuba. But after the communist Fidel Castro came to power in the 1960s, relations between the US and Cuba deteriorated, and the US citizens were banned from visiting Cuba, making this route unusable. At the same time, tastes in America were changing. Marijuana was no longer trending, cocaine became the new sought-after party drug. The Colombian cartels already had the goods, they just needed a way to ship them.
I would expect in 1980, it was 5% what it is now. And then about 1981, it rather exploded in Hollywood and New York and Miami. It became the rich man's party drug.
Escobar and his gang started small. They would buy coca paste, process it into powder, and sell it to the middlemen who then smuggled everything into the United States.
From there, they looked for ways to get the drugs to the United States using airline passengers who stored the cocaine and transported it to the US, no?
But middlemen made the business not only less reliable, but also less profitable. As the popular saying goes, if you want something done, do it yourself. Soon the gang decided to handle the smuggling on its own. They started by sending their people on commercial flights and ships to America, each carrying a small batch in their luggage. Such couriers are called mules. Small brick-shaped packets of powder were hidden in their suitcases among the clothes. Today's X-ray checks would give those no chance at all, but back then, the luggage inspections weren't nearly as thorough. So, it worked. On top of that, packets of cocaine were taped to the body with duct tape. The operation ran like clockwork, but the batches were still too small, and the market was growing. Escobar saw the opportunity to make a lot more money here. That's when he decided to hire a number of pilots for his needs, including Roger Reeves. Thanks to his work, the cartel's turnover and accordingly its profits had skyrocketed. By 1977, Escobar was already considered one of Colombia's most influential drug lords, but simply being one of didn't sit well with him. He proposed to the other traffickers to join forces, and that's how the famous Medellin Cartel was born.
It was formed when to reduce the cost of transportations, product manufacturing, security, and contacts with government officials.
Escobar headed the alliance. The Ochoa brothers, Jorge Luis, Fabio, and Juan David were in charge of coca leaves and the production laboratories. Pablo's brother, Gaviria Escobar, handled all the accounting. All the billions of dollars passed through this man's hands. The most ruthless member of the cartel was Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. He was in charge of security and all paramilitary operations. Carlos Leder took care of logistics and exports to the United States. He's believed to have been the first one who came up with the idea of giving people their first dose for free. This practice is believed to have increased the number of drug addicts in the US exponentially. The cartel had its own plantations, production labs, and even military bases which took care of shipping the goods. The largest base was set up in the Bahamas. The cartel bought the entire island of Norman's Cay for $7 million. It had everything a proper military base does: a runway with radars, armed security squads, and patrol boats. The end product was shipped there, then divided into smaller loads and moved to the United States. The local population of the island was quickly dealt with as per Escobar's favorite approach: silver or lead.
Offering money in exchange for cooperation thought also threatening. In Colombia, there was a saying, plata o plomo, which is like money or lead, maybe, plata o plomo.
The approach never failed and worked on everyone, including officials, police, and ordinary residents, so the entire island was soon under the gang's control. No one could reach the island unnoticed. From there, the shipments went straight to Florida, Georgia, or Miami. Beyond that, the Medellin Cartel practically monopolized the market in Mexico, as well as in Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, and even in Spain. Delivering cargo soon became an easy job because the masterminds quickly realized that they could use not only planes but also submarines. Yes, you heard it right. The Medellin Cartel owned 2 submarines and stuffed them with cocaine to the brim before sending them to their destinations. They were remotely controlled, and back in the day, it was practically impossible to track them. Thousands of people on different continents worked for the cartel's complex and well-established mechanism.
As they had many people involved in the economic and production sectors, no? Legal defense, politic, and of course the use of violence. For example, Pablo organized large gangs of hitmen, and Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha formed veritable paramilitary armies, no? And that includes a great many people. International shipments were easily organized. organized. Since in each country along the route there were partners, whether legal or illegal, and there were many routes that passed throughout many places. Some throughout the Caribbean, others throughout of the Pacific, others throughout Central America and Mexico.
One of the main operational principles adopted by the Medellin Cartel was that everything was on a need-to-know basis for the people working on the ground. This ensured that no one who got caught by the police could give up any valuable information, even if they wanted to. People usually didn't even know who they were ultimately working for. That, of course, did not apply to the pilots. They saw the bases and communicated directly with the cartel's leaders, and they knew a lot about the whole setup of the operation. One of the pilots who flew cocaine from Norman's Cay to the US in the early 1980s became a far more widely known figure than Roger Reeves, a pilot named Barry Seal. Roger personally introduced Seal to the leaders of the Medellin Cartel, but Roger eventually got to spend most of his life behind bars.
And then I went to prison for a marijuana charge. I got 35 years for possession of marijuana and tax evasions. So while I was in prison, Barry just cut me out, just like bye-bye.
So Seal picked up Roger's gig with the cartel. Roger even insists that Seal appropriated his aircraft, his routes, and even his techniques of staying off radar, all the while Roger kept trying to break out of prison.
Okay, I was gone 38 years before I came home. I was actually in prison 33 years. I escaped 5 times, and the time I was counted out on escape was 5 years, being on the most wanted list in the world.
The millions he had made smuggling cocaine got embezzled, and Roger never got to enjoy any of his wealth by the time he finally walked free.
And everybody in the world that I touched or did business with stole from me. Not one single person was honest except my wife. Everybody was a thief. Bad thief. Lawyers took the money for my bond, gone, disappeared.
He's been to 28 prisons in 7 countries on 4 continents. Roger's punishment was one of the harshest, especially in view of his constant attempts to escape. He was even tortured in Mexican prisons. He now talks about it with a smile on his face, saying he simply loves adventure. And there certainly was a lot of adventure in his life, and surely a lot of betrayal. Barry Seal, the man who essentially took Roger's place, was eventually caught by the US authorities. Since pilots had valuable intel, his capture was considered instrumental in the fight against Escobar. Instead of putting him behind bars, CIA persuaded him to become their informant about Escobar's operations. Hidden cameras were installed in his planes, and thanks to the intelligence he provided, the war on drug trafficking picked up pace. In 1986, Barry was gunned down with a machine gun while driving his Cadillac. Roger had met with him 3 months before that and even tried to warn him.
Well, I went to dinner that night, and Barry came in with his wife, Debbie, and we had dessert together. And I hugged his neck, and I said, "My friend, they're going to kill you." Oh, no, blah, blah, blah. And 3 months later, he was dead. They riddled him.
Meanwhile, Pablo Escobar made a move to seize control over all drug trafficking in the country. He gave other Colombian drug lords a choice. Either they run their shipments through his cartel and pay him 35% of the revenue, essentially a straight-up protection racket, or they go out of business entirely. This way, the Medellin Cartel became the world's largest drug trafficking organization. It had its own security system, a vast logistics network, and multiple production facilities. Its profits were assessed at dozens of millions of dollars daily. Of course, the police force of every affected country tried to fight the illegal drug trafficking, but Escobar managed to buy off officials in most countries with bribes. In the United States, however, he used a different approach. From time to time, the authorities were fed intel about small shipments that were deliberately allowed to be seized. This created the illusion of some success, diverted the law enforcement's attention, and let much larger shipments slip through right under their noses. Essentially, Escobar became the world's #1 drug lord. He was drowning in money and luxury, buying prime real estate, yachts, cars, and building himself villas and safe houses. He had an unlimited supply of it all. It was as if the man had simply entered a GTA cheat code for infinite cash.
He was incredibly wealthy because in just 5 years, according to magazines like Forbes and Fortune and others, He was one of the richest men in the world. He had around $3 billion or more, and he owned mansions in many places, the most famous being Hacienda Nápoles, or Nápoles Farm, and the Monaco building, but he had a lot.
His personal car collection counted over 100 vehicles, 40 of which were rare classic cars. For example, this 1928 Cadillac. Escobar bought it because his idol Al Capone had owned the same model. Or look at this Mercedes. It's clearly not the most practical car for rough Colombian terrain, but Escobar simply loved vehicles that were out of reach for most people. His taste wasn't limited to luxury cars though. He was particularly fond of this Renault 4 model. It's considered legendary because it was Escobar's first racing car. In 1979, he drove one in a local race and lost. He loved this model so much that he would actually give his associates expensive cars in exchange for their old Renault 4s. He had his name written across the windshield of his very first one. That wasn't a race requirement. Escobar just wanted it there. He did the same with his racing Porsches. It's hard to put a price on what his car collection would be worth today, because many of Pablo Escobar's cars became legendary and were auctioned off for enormous sums of money. And by the way, he was also generous when it came to his team's cars. Members of his gang didn't exactly drive junk either. His private army's vehicle of choice was the Toyota Land Cruiser. It was powerful and reliable and helped the criminals shake off any pursuit on any kind of road. By the time the Medellin Cartel was born, Pablo Escobar was already enjoying a luxurious lifestyle. He had mansions with servants and was used to his crisp, white shirts.
Pablo did not seem like a violent person at all. He seemed like a gentleman. He had a nice, a nice countenance about him. He was almost a little bit humble, a little meek to meet me, had a nice handshake. He was dressed clean and nice. A man, not a large man at all, maybe 5'8", 5'9", 170 pounds, slim. He just nice as he could be.
He spent his free time playing soccer, which he loved, at family parties and at parties with his friends and cronies, which included famous orchestras and stunning women, of course. These were the pastimes of someone from humble beginnings who had all the money in the world to spend however he wanted.
The residences he built were simply unbelievable. The most famous of them is the so-called Naples estate, Hacienda Nápoles, located about 90 miles east of Medellin. The estate included a huge Spanish colonial house and a sculpture park. It also housed Escobar's famous car collection, and on top of that, there was also a private brothel, a bullfighting arena, a private airport, and get this, a Formula One racetrack. But the estate's most expensive and spectacular feature was its zoo. Animals were brought in for Escobar from all over the world, including antelopes, elephants, hippos — he especially loved hippos — giraffes, ostriches, and ponies. Its total cost exceeded $63 million, but since Escobar's operation was raking in at least $10 million a day, it was basically pocket money for him. At this estate, he often threw parties for the poor, handed out gifts, and organized zoo tours for children. Quite naturally, despite the fact that Escobar killed, bribed, and sold illegal drugs, the locals adored him. Moreover, he was pretty much worshipped by everyone who worked for him. They say he paid his people so much that they could always afford to buy a house and a car, and they repaid him with incredible loyalty, because there was no way they could earn that kind of money anywhere else. All in all, Escobar did a lot of charity work.
Poor people, he gave money for stadiums and people. He had so much he didn't know what to do with it, so he gave people money, and of course, you're gonna give people something, they'll line up by the millions. So that was part of it, for sure. And I think that he wasn't a bad person to start off with, but once the killing started, it became war.
He built sports fields, hospitals, schools, and roads for the poor folk of Medellin. At one point, he started an initiative called Medellin Without Slums, and he really had entire neighborhoods built for those who never had a proper home. Naturally, the public eye soon started to see Escobar as their protector and benefactor.
I was there many times, primarily for people who had been living in a garbage dump and whose homes had burned down. This earned him widespread support, so people began urging him to enter politics, which he eventually did.
Truth be told, his charity efforts considerably helped Escobar with money laundering required to legitimize his enormous profits. Without it, it would have been much harder. Nevertheless, Patrick Becerra believes that despite all this, Escobar's desire to help the poor was quite genuine.
I don't really think he had a grand political platform. I think that. But rather a desire to carry out action that will improve the lives of the most vulnerable social sectors through various social programs. Escobar didn't truly want to change the system. He wanted to be accepted within it.
The system, however, had a problem accepting the drug lord, not the philanthropist. By the late 1970s, crime rates had significantly surged in the United States on the account of growing numbers of addicts committing crimes in desperate attempts to get money for their next fix. In 1979, the governments of the United States and Colombia signed a crucial agreement. Any drug lord caught in Colombia had to be extradited to America. 3 years later, President Ronald Reagan officially declared an all-out war on the illegal drug trafficking, designating Pablo Escobar as public enemy #1. That year, Escobar got elected to the Colombian Congress as an alternate congressman, basically acting as a substitute player. If one of the main members couldn't attend the session, Escobar would fill in and participate. This way, the drug lord, billionaire, and philanthropist Escobar gained immunity from prosecution because holding a public office made him untouchable under the Colombian law. On top of that, he was given a diplomatic visa. It was almost comical. Take a look at this picture. This is Pablo Escobar in a white shirt with his young son posing for a camera in front of the White House. It was essentially a slap in the face to President Reagan and his efforts to fight drug trafficking. Escobar went on a tour of the United States protected by diplomatic immunity as a member of the Colombian Congress. And while the poor idolized him as their benefactor, the officials knew exactly who he was, they just didn't want to mess with him.
And some in journalism, politics, and the armed forces persecuted him for it. But others in the political class were afraid of being displaced by someone with Escobar's money and history. Because receiving money from him was one thing, competing with him was quite another. So they persecuted and expelled him, and Escobar, feeling betrayed, began killing many people.
But at some point, one man refused to stay silent. It was Minister of Justice Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. He proved Escobar's ties to the cartel and that his election campaign had been funded with cocaine money. In January 1984, Escobar was expelled from Congress, and Rodrigo Lara Bonilla's days were numbered. A few months later, on April 30th, when the minister's Mercedes stopped at a traffic light, 2 motorcyclists pulled up and opened fire at point-blank range, targeting the minister and his bodyguards. Bonilla was hit several times in the shoulder. He tried to take cover under the seat, but one of the killers shot him in the back of the head. That murder became the point of no return for the most famous drug lord in history. Escobar was immediately accused of the murder, but he tried to buy his way out. And you have to appreciate the scale of it. He offered to pay off Colombia's entire foreign debt. Can you imagine that? That's $13 billion. It would have been the largest bribe in human history, but it was turned down. But you remember, if the silver doesn't work, then it's lead.
Escobar had very powerful partners who formed armies in the Colombian countryside, and Pablo used them for his personal wars. Yeah?
Pablo Escobar essentially declared a war on his own government. The fighting was carried out by the countless small gangs that joined forces at the time of need, and in addition, Escobar created a group called the Extraditables. Together, they began hunting down anyone who in any way tried to fight drug trafficking, such as police officers, journalists, judges, and government officials. It is known that in the first 2 years of that war, they killed several thousand people. Their most audacious and massive terrorist operation took place in 1985. Together with the opposition guerrilla groups, the cartel stormed the Palace of Justice in Bogota, Colombia's capital, using tanks, machine guns, and grenades. It was a full-scale military operation that ended with 97 hostages dead, including 11 Supreme Court justices. The outcome paralyzed Colombia's entire judicial system. The surviving judges simply resigned because they knew that they would be next. The Medellin Cartel continued to run like clockwork, but Escobar was no longer building palaces. Instead, he was building hideouts. He was at war, and he invested all his heart, mind, and everything he had into it. He was on the run the whole time. Every safe house contained a hidden stash of cash, but Escobar wanted his old life back. He wanted to live openly and flaunt his wealth, his collection of cars, his hippos, and villas. And so, he tried to cut a deal with the state once again. Escobar offered to surrender to the police in exchange for a guarantee that he would not be extradited to the US. But again, the answer was no. That prompted another wave of violence, and every time the brutality of the attacks only escalated. At the same time, Escobar managed to evade the authorities and stay free.
The problem in capturing Escobar was that half the police were after him, but the other half were protecting him. And that was the case.
The cartel protected anyone who in any way was on their payroll. The exact amounts of the bribes are unknown, but we know that many people worked loyally for Escobar, helping the drug lord to continue to live comfortably and proceed with the campaign of terror. In addition to targeted assassinations, Escobar's group carried out 7 major terrorist attacks. Around 400 people were injured. More than 30 were killed. All in all, the cartel went on to murder between 40 and 50 people almost every week.
I went down there one night in downtown, and all night long I could hear pistol shots going off in the street. The next morning, be paper every which way, and I asked the guy at the front desk about it. He said, "I didn't hear anything, sir." So that's how bad it was.
Colombian streets were no longer safe because of all the shootings and murders, and this massive terror campaign culminated with the assassination attempt on presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria Trujillo, who had promised to capture Escobar if he became president. Escobar's men blew up the plane Gaviria was supposed to fly in. 107 people died, but the candidate wasn't on board. His plans had changed at the last moment.
But then whenever he had the airliner blown up, the Avianca airline, and killed all those people, women, children, old people, I thought, you're a monster. So I was sorry I ever shook his hand. So yeah, he's a demon. He's in hell now. For sure for that.
After that, the authorities finally gave the green light to the law enforcement to destroy everything connected to the drug lord. Almost all the Medellin cartel's chemical laboratories were raided. His mansions, cars, yachts, and planes were seized. In response, Escobar raised the tax for the traffickers who moved their product through his cartel. Instead of 30%, he started taking 60 to 70% of the revenue. Any war costs money. The number of people who'd rather see him dead was growing fast. First of all the families of all the people he had killed. If put together, they could populate a big town at the very least. Secondly, all the state agencies and the government. And, on top of that, other drug lords who didn't like having to pay for Pablo's troubles out of their pockets. After a few years of unsuccessful attempts to capture Escobar, the government finally agreed to forego his extradition to the United States in exchange for voluntary surrender. He was sentenced to, get this, to serve just 5 years in prison. 5 years, right? But there was one condition. He would build the prison himself. And he went ahead and built a real palace, complete with a swimming pool, a soccer field, gardens, and waterfalls. That's right, he even installed a permanent waterfall. And that was just the outdoors. Indoors, there were saunas, a casino, a dance floor, and several bars. One hell of a prison. He was allowed to have visitors. He was even allowed to go out himself whenever he wanted. For example, people saw him at soccer games. Apparently, the arrangement suited everyone just fine. On the upside, the endless killings and terrorist attacks had finally stopped. Meanwhile, Escobar continued running the Medellin cartel's affairs. Inside his own prison, he went on to torture and murder his rivals and traitors. A year into his prison term, information leaked that Escobar had killed 2 of his own associates behind bars. They say that before killing them, he personally pulled out their fingernails and drilled holes in their kneecaps. After that, the decision was made to transfer Escobar to a real prison, but he escaped. And this time, the manhunt turned into pure hell for him. No one wanted to help him anymore, neither the officials nor the cartels.
And people are human. As long as they're getting paid, they're do what you ask. But when the money gets slack and it don't come, and they do this and the other one, and then now other people are popping up. The Cali cartel took over about that time, and the Rodriguez brothers.
Escobar had found himself cornered. In January 1993, he staged the last terrorist attack in his life, a bomb explosion outside a bookstore, and most victims were children with their parents. At that point, enemies of Pablo Escobar in the criminal world had formed a new organization, the so-called Los Pepes. They were as ruthless as Escobar himself. They hunted down members of the Medellin Cartel, Pablo being their main target. When Pablo realized that a real hunt had begun for him, his first priority was to save his wife and 2 children.
And yeah, Pablo met his wife in the La Paz neighborhood of Envigado. It's close to Medellin. His wife was 15 or 14 years old, it's true. And in fact, I think she was younger, it's true. And he liked her, courted her, won her heart, and eloped with her to get married. It must be said that in those times, especially in working class neighborhoods, very young women, almost girls, married older men. Like Pablo, who was about 8 years older than his wife. But yeah, in this time was so normal.
Okay.
Pablo was 23
He had a
years
crazy
old.
number of mistresses, but he didn't let any of them have his children.
Just 2, Juan Pablo and Manuela. And he had no children outside of his marriage. There's a very conservative mentality about that, which persists in those parts of Colombia. It's even known that he forced a woman who was his lover to have an abortion.
His wife and children spent some time on the run with him. His son Juan Pablo later recalled that once they had to spend the night in an open field. To keep the children warm, Pablo burned stacks of money. The drug lord often said that he could find a replacement for anything in his life, but not for his wife and children.
He was, by all accounts, a loving and caring father. There are recordings of the stories he read to his daughter, to little daughter, which he sent her even after he was being pursued and couldn't be with her. Yeah. An amoroso and cariñoso padre.
Meanwhile, Pablo's empire continued to fall apart. First, Los Pepes burned down his mother's estate. Then 2 bombs exploded in the neighborhood where his family lived. He had tried to get them out of the country, but the authorities turned the plane back. They were placed under police surveillance. Every call and movement was monitored. That, in the end, proved to be instrumental in catching Escobar. Since he could no longer see them, he could only call them and keep the conversations shorter than 1 minute so the intelligence services wouldn't have time to trace his location. On December the 1st, 1993, he turned 44. He was holed up in an apartment in one of Medellin's neighborhoods, and there was no family by his side. His business was in ruins. His glory days were in the past. The next day, he called his family and spoke with them for about 5 minutes. That moment of weakness had sealed his fate. Very soon, the entire neighborhood was surrounded. The man who had once been the richest person on the planet climbed onto the roof and tried to escape. One of the sniper's bullets hit him in the head. Although some think otherwise, many people, including Pablo's son, still believe that the world's most notorious drug lord took his own life.
You know, I understand. I'm sure he killed himself. They didn't shoot him. That was a lie. You can see on his head where he took his right hand and put that pistol, and you can see the white hair burned around the hole. So he committed suicide. He knew it was in, but he didn't want to be tortured or put in a prison cell. So he shot himself.
Look at these armed people in the photograph smiling next to Pablo Escobar's dead body. It's as if they are taking a picture with a living and breathing idol instead of a corpse. You'd expect all the killings and terrorist attacks in Colombia to cease. After all, the villain was dead, right? But it turned out that things weren't so simple.
That even though Escobar died, the violence didn't end in Colombia. And the narco traffic is the same thing or worse. There have been drug lords just as bad as, or even worse than him, and Colombia remains the world's leading producer of cocaine. For example, in this moment, we have maybe 50 organizations violence in the place. Yeah, they are fighting. They are sending cocaine to the world. And maybe in the time of Pablo Escobar, we had maybe 5 organizations, no more. Okay, in this moment, for me, the situation is worse. Maybe, okay, the bombs, the assassination of presidential politics, candidates of president, of the presidents, no exists more, but the situation is not easy and is not happy.
Times have changed, and the present-day drug lords no longer enjoy that kind of popularity among the Colombians.
Well, they idolized him. Pablo, Pablo, Pablo. But now the landowners and the people that want a wonderful and beautiful country, they say, we can't have stuff like this. We've got to have law and order. We cannot have mass killings in the street and people like this with this mentality running our country.
The government is now trying to erase the memory of the once almighty Escobar and minimize his influence on the public sentiment. According to Patrice Baquero, the neighborhood that Escobar had built for Medellin's poor is now being given a silent treatment by the authorities. No official sources ever mention it.
The authorities have even tried to erase Escobar's image, and the governments, they are working to erase Escobar's image as if he didn't exist, and above all, as if he had no ties to many people who are in power today.
But Escobar has essentially become the Eiffel Tower of Medellin, its main attraction that people travel to see. Crowds of tourists have never stopped visiting his grave, bringing fresh flowers every day. Those who wish to touch the tombstone have to wait in line. Well, it's not quite the Lenin tomb in Moscow, but still. The neighborhood he had built is still known as Pablo Escobar's neighborhood. The walls of its houses are decorated with the portraits of the drug lord presented as a benefactor of the poor, and thousands of people continue to visit his grave.
Are also many people in working class neighborhood who look up upon Escobar with affection, or younger people who see him as if he were a fictional character.
Roger remembers Escobar very well and fully understands that in reality he was a very cruel person. Nevertheless, he has a certain nostalgia for everything that happened to him when he was young.
Yes, I would love to do it again if it was the same as it was back then, when the stuff was not fentanyl killing people. It was all just a rich man's party drug.